Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Be perfect.
Hello, everyone. I'm Arthel Neville. Welcome to a brand new hour inside America's news headquarters. Hello, Eric.
And hello, Arthel, again. Welcome back from vacation. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. Topping the news this hour. Well, it seems to be a war of words are erupting after President Trump's first face-to-face sit-down with Vladimir Putin. The top diplomats from both nations will be going toe-to-toe on whether the president accepted the Russian leader's denial of interference in our election.
Plus, 2 U.S. bombers flying close to the North Korean border in a defensive show of force as they conduct a training exercise with some of America's closest Asian allies.
And authorities are letting evacuees return to their homes near a popular ski resort. But they're still warning they may have to evacuate again as crews are battling a massive wildfire nearby. We'll have the latest on that and all the news at this hour. This is America's News Headquarters, and it starts right now.
And we begin with President Trump homeward bound as Mr. Trump wraps up his second trip overseas as Commander-in-Chief. Air Force One taking the president back to Washington after a final jam-packed session at the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. The president following up his meeting with Vladimir Putin with yet another high-profile sit-down, this time with President Xi Jinping of China. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts joins us live from Hamburg, where it is just after midnight on Sunday. Good morning and good night.
Yes, good morning to you again, Arthel. Good to be with you. You know, it was a jam-packed, not just day, but a couple of days for the president. And on board Air Force One on the way out of Germany, 3 of the president's top advisors, Gary Cohn, Chief Economic Advisor, H.R. McMaster, his National Security Advisor, and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, briefed the traveling press pool aboard Air Force One on the results of the G20. They had an upbeat assessment of how things went for the United States. The Treasury Secretary, who tends from time to time to use effusive language to describe the president, said that his performance in the bilateral meetings was, quote, absolutely brilliant. There were a total of 8 bilateral meetings here at the G20 in Hamburg. There was 2 during the Poland part of the president's trip. The administration officials described those meetings as, quote, very, very substantive discussions, not just relationship builders. On his way out of Germany, the president tweeted, quote, leaving Hamburg for Washington, D.C. and the White House just left China's President Xi Jinping, where we had an excellent meeting on trade and North Korea. That bilateral meeting went 90 minutes. I'm told it could have gone longer, but both presidents had to get on board their planes and get back home, so they had to cut it short, even though 90 minutes doesn't exactly sound short. I'm told that the discussions were very direct about North Korea. The president has been growingly frustrated with the lack of Chinese action on North Korea, and he's been thinking about more sanctions against Chinese entities and individuals similar to what were imposed by the Treasury Department last week. But going into the meeting, the president sounded very optimistic about the potential of this second bilateral meeting that they've had. Listen here.
I appreciate the things that you have done relative to the very substantial problem that we all face in North Korea, a problem that something has to be done about. Many things have happened that have led to trade imbalances, and we're going to turn that around. I know that with China in particular, which is a great trading partner, we will be able to do something that will be equitable and reciprocal.
Keep in mind, though, that the president was very optimistic about the potential for China to help put pressure on Pyongyang after they had their first bilateral meeting at Mar-a-Lago, and then he has been somewhat disappointed since then, Arthel.
Yeah, meanwhile, back to that other meeting, there's still some discrepancy, John, over what was said during the president's meeting with Putin about Russia meddling during the election.
Yeah, this goes back to the bilateral meeting yesterday that lasted 2 hours and 15 minutes. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, said that after President Putin said that he didn't have anything to do with the hacking of the U.S. election or meddling in the U.S. electoral process, and neither did the Russian government, that the president accepted those assurances. State Department Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, and that was just a firework lightly that went off there. State Department Secretary of State Rex Tillerson disagreed with that assessment, saying the president pressed him on it a number of times. And while those officials aboard Air Force One would not definitively say that the president was not accepting of it, we did hear from the Russian president himself this afternoon, and here's what he said.
He asked questions. He was genuinely interested in a number of details. As far as I could, I answered him in detail. He asked me questions. I answered. I clarified. And I think that he was satisfied with my answers.
Think that he was satisfied with the answers that he was given. The only person we'll find out if they were satisfied with those answers would be the president. We didn't get a chance to speak with him this afternoon, Arthel. There had been a press conference scheduled. That did not take place. I'm told it was a matter of timing. So next time we have an opportunity to ask him a question, we will definitely ask him about that. Arthel?
I'm sure you will, and I'm sure everyone will want to hear the president's answer. And I'm glad that you clarified, because I was wondering what that noise was in the background, John Roberts.
Now, there's a lot of people on the streets of Hamburg. It's a Saturday night. The protests have pretty much dissipated, at least, from our vantage point. But every once in a while, revelers fire off a firecracker, and that's what you heard just a second ago.
Okay, John Roberts, thanks so much. Eric?
Well, for the second time in 3 days, the U.S. Air Force has sent a not-so-subtle message to North Korea, holding precision bombing exercises with both the South Korean and Japanese military. Air Force B-1 bombers buzzing the demilitarized zone between the North and the South, using those B-1 bombers. They've done that in the past. It is, of course, a show of force in response to North Korea's successful recent missile launch of a missile that some experts think could reach Alaska. Did Kim Jong-un, though, get the message? Will he change his provocative behavior? Garrett Tenney joins us with more from our Washington bureau. Hi, Garrett.
Well, Eric, military officials say that today's mission shows the U.S. is prepared to use the full range of its capabilities to defend against North Korea's aggression. This morning, 2 U.S. Air Force B-1 bombers with South Korean fighter jet escorts flew near the Korean demilitarized zone to conduct a simulated attack on North Korea. The bombers, which can each carry 42,000 pounds of explosives, practiced attack runs during the mission by dropping inactive weapons on targets at a testing range in South Korea. Following today's mission, Lieutenant General Thomas Bergeson, who is the deputy commander of U.S. forces in Korea, said, quote, U.S. bombers and Republic of Korea fighters are just 2 of many lethal military options at our disposal. On Wednesday, the U.S. and South Korean military also fired short-range missiles into the waters off the Korean peninsula as part of a joint missile test in response to the North's successful launch of an ICBM this week. As U.S. officials try to find a diplomatic solution to Pyongyang's aggressive behavior and nuclear ambitions, they are growing increasingly frustrated with China's refusal to put more pressure on their ally.
We continue to make that clear to China that we would prefer they take the action themselves, and we're still calling upon them to do that. So I would say our engagement is unchanged with China, and our expectations are unchanged.
And North Korea was one of the leading topics of discussion today between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. As you heard John Roberts mention, right before that meeting, President Trump said the North's nuclear threat will eventually be resolved one way or the other. Eric?
It is a top threat that we face, and they're dealing with it. Thank you, Garrett. Arthel?
Eric, now over to the battle over health care. Senate GOP leaders planning to make a final push to pass their bill to repeal and replace Obamacare when lawmakers return to Washington from the July 4th recess next week. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell now saying they may need to work with Democrats who want to fix Obamacare, not repeal it. Ellison Barber is in Washington with more.
The Republican road to health care reform has been covered in potholes, and it's far from a smooth ride today. According to analysis from the Roper Center, this is the most unpopular major piece of legislation in the past 30 years. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says it's complicated.
We're in a big discussion among ourselves, that is the Senate Republican Conference, about the way forward, and I don't have the answer to that yet. I think every Republican is in favor of association health plans. The problem is whether it can be included from a parliamentary point of view in what we're trying to do. It's a very complicated procedure.
Senate Republicans initially said they expected to pass health care legislation by July 4th. Instead, they received opposition to the plan from Democrats and members of their own party. At one point, President Trump said if Senate Republicans can't pass something, they should repeal now and replace later. But there is a new proposal from Senator Ted Cruz that would allow insurers to sell stripped-down, cheaper plans.
I'm very, very active in helping lead the effort for Republicans to honor our promise to repeal Obamacare and then for us to pass patient-centered reforms.
Senator Mike Lee is supporting the plan, and the White House seems open to it as well.
We support Senator Cruz and Senator Lee's efforts. This is similar to efforts that transpired in the House, and we think that it's perfectly appropriate, his amendment, and so we hope it's part of the process of bringing everybody together.
Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer, however, calls Cruz's amendment a hoax, saying, quote, it makes health care more expensive because deductibles and co-payments would be so onerous that many Americans would pay much more out of their pockets than they pay today. It could be a difficult sell to moderate Republicans as well. In an interview posted online, Senator Chuck Grassley told Iowa Public Radio he's concerned the proposal is subterfuge and could annihilate the pre-existing condition requirement in the existing bill. Arthel?
Ellis and Barber, thank you. Eric?
Arthel, firefighters in several western states have been braving scorching hot temperatures to battle wildfires there. You can take a look and see the thick plumes of smoke that are billowing over the mountains in Colorado. Some people who've been evacuated from their homes near the Breckenridge ski resort, well, they were allowed to return, but only told that then they may have to evacuate again. Will Carr has the very latest in this fire and those efforts from our Los Angeles bureau. Hi, Will.
Eric, there are dozens, almost 40 wildfires burning in every western state this week, and they're all fueled by perfect fire conditions, hot temperatures, strong erratic winds, and low humidity. The Alamo fire, burning just over an hour north of Santa Barbara, doubled in size overnight. It's now grown to almost 6,000 acres and is only 10% contained. Several hundred residents have had to pack up and are under a mandatory evacuation. It comes as the public information officer for Santa Barbara County Fire posted an eerie picture of a blood-red full moon rising over the thick flames. 1,000 firefighters are trying to protect the homes in the area and up the containment numbers. Good news in Colorado, evacuations have been lifted for a fire burning 2 miles north of the popular ski area in Breckenridge. Firefighters on the ground have run into favorable conditions that have allowed them to increase containment to 25%. Take a listen to one resident.
It's just crazy. My friends back home have been calling me like, hey, is everything okay? My mom called me, worried about me. She said, don't go hiking, stay out of the woods. It's okay, Mom.
In Montana, a fire near Landusky has burned nearly 40 square miles and is now 40% contained. Many fires are raging in parts of the Southwest where temperatures have spiked. Some areas are seeing record triple-digit heat. That's certainly not making things easier on the thousands of firefighters out there. What they really need, Eric, is rain. Unfortunately, there's not much in the forecast. Eric.
Yeah, those temperatures are really making that battle difficult. Will, thank you. Arthel?
Eric, a partial collapse at an apartment building, and neighbors rush in to search for survivors, digging through with their bare hands. We're going to have details on that tragedy next. Plus, President Trump wrapping up his trip to the G20 summit with a meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, saying North Korea will be dealt with one way or another. Did he convince the Chinese to get tougher on Kim Jong-un and his regime? We'll talk about that coming up next.
I'm sure that whether it's on trade or whether it's on North Korea or any of the many things that we'll be discussing, we will come to a successful conclusion.
Playing right now.
Oh, time now for a quick check of the headlines for you. An apartment building in southern Italy has collapsed, killing 8 people. The victims include 2 families and an elderly person. Officials say a renovation of that building may be to blame. Meanwhile, in Oakland, California, a massive fire damaged a building under construction. Massive flames forced people living nearby to evacuate Thankfully, though, no injuries were reported. The Texas governor's mansion lighting up in blue last night, all to honor the 5 Dallas police officers who were shot and killed 1 year ago while working at a peaceful protest.
Thank you, Mr. President. And on behalf of the United States, I would like to just say that it's an honor to have gotten to know you. We are developing and have developed a wonderful relationship. I appreciate the things that you have done relative to the very substantial problem that we all face in North Korea, a problem that something has to be done about.
And that's President Trump after his sit-down today with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. North Korea and its increasing aggression, a major topic of discussion for those two leaders. It was also brought up in the president's other high-profile sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin. President Trump did not hold a news conference after that meeting, but Putin did, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But here now to grade the president's performance at the G20 is Florida Congressman Francis Rooney, a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Congressman, you know what? Can we save the grade for later and we'll start with China?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. Understanding that there is no simple answer to how to handle the escalating tension with and the threat from North Korea, is China still the most effective entry point to a solution to Pyongyang? And if so, what are you hoping the President Trump said to the Chinese President Xi during their meeting earlier today? And also, what are China's pressure points? Is trade one of them?
Yeah, I definitely think that China is in the catbird seat in terms of coming up with any kind of non-military peaceful solution to North Korea, a diplomatic solution. They dominate their economy. They have huge trade relationships. They can cut off all their natural resources and things like that. They've got them pinned up geographically, particularly if we somehow get Russia to join in, who also shares a geography with them. And I'm just hopeful that President Trump made his case again that we need China to help us with a peaceful diplomatic solution here.
Oh, hopefully President Trump was able to make that point forcefully. Meanwhile, as you well know, the U.S. is stepping up military exercises in the region. Do you think it'll ever come to the U.S. taking military action against North Korea? And are diplomatic talks with Kim Jong-un a crazy idea?
Well, this guy's a madman. It's hard to negotiate with a terrorist like this and think that you can make any headway. You know, you have to have integrity on both sides of the table to have diplomatic negotiation that has a chance of success. But fortunately, we have the THAAD defense system in South Korea now.
Yeah.
We have missile tests being done to show North Korea that we're revving up and ready to deploy some of the more limited remedies that we can if we have to, and we have a wide range of remedies we can do. I just would really hope that we can get China and Russia to help solve this thing diplomatically.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope for sure, and thus far we're still waiting for some sort of really forceful response from China on Pyongyang. Meanwhile, Russian President Putin beating President Trump to the punch, holding a press conference after their meeting and claiming that President Trump accepted Putin's denial of Russia's interference in the 2016 presidential election, and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley commenting on this to Face the Nation. Let's listen.
But given that the president, as you said, knows that the Russians meddled, what consequences will they face as a result of that action?
I think you're going to have to ask the president. I think that's one of the things is confronting them, letting them know that we know this happened, letting them know it can't happen again.
So, will there be consequences brought down by President Trump, and what should Mr. Trump do?
Well, let's see what they find out really happened, because they tried to conduct espionage on us, but we haven't seen that they were particularly effective at accomplishing very much other than hacking the DNC.
Yeah, but it's a big deal that they did it. It's a big deal that they did it.
Yeah, but there's espionage conducted all around the world all the time. And in some ways, I feel pretty good that we were able to repel their cyber attacks as successfully as we were. You know, also, I think they wanted to get caught here. I think there's more to this than just meets the eye. We conduct surveillance and espionage all over the world. Many countries do. That is not detected or ever admitted.
But is it with the intent to interfere with those other countries' system, the basic fabric of their way of life and conducting their business there?
Well, I would say that a bot is just a modern day version of a leaflet drop.
Okay, so you're not concerned with what the intelligence agencies have said, that this is a big dang deal, what Russia did as it pertains to the 2016 presidential election?
I'm concerned that they would try it, sure. But I'm also sanguine enough to know that this kind of stuff's tried quite often. Remember, it was just back in George Bush's first term that we kicked out 50 Russian spies, whom they never admitted were spies. So there's a lot of things that go on. The good thing is they didn't get very far, or at least we don't think they got very far yet.
But are you afraid that they'll keep trying? You're afraid that they'll keep trying? Or, yeah? Go ahead.
They might. You know, I think that in this day and time, with the technology and the cyber attacks, we have to be so vigilant, and we have to increase our investment in defensive as well as offensive measures.
Okay, well, we could keep talking about that, but I wanted to give you an opportunity, as I promised in the beginning, for you to give President Trump a grade on his G20 appearances and performances and meetings.
I think it was a very successful trip for the president for the United States. I mean, given the fact that they came out of the meeting with Putin with a commitment to continue to fight ISIS together and to try to put in no-fly zones and ceasefires, tends to indicate to me that the president showed Putin that he can't be manipulated by him and that he's a tough guy. I think it's really good that he showed concerning trade that America first does not equal America alone, that there's plenty of opportunity to deal with countries that have excessively low currencies and trade surpluses versus countries like ours that has a excessive trade deficit and have freer trade. And I think that the fact that the Europeans admitted that showed that the president achieved some real tangible success. And then lastly, I want to thank him for hanging tough on the Paris Accord. You know, I don't care how many Europeans say that they want to do the Paris Accord, wreck their economy just to subsidize China, India, Russia, and some African countries. That's their business. We have the United States of America to protect, which is the essence of foreign policy. Protect our national interest.
Well, that's a doozy, but I have to go. I just got, as you're wrapping it, telling me your last statement, I just got a wrap, so I have to go. So I have to leave it there. Congressman Francis Rooney, I appreciate your time, and maybe we'll come back and talk about your last statement some other time.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
We know the debate over voter privacy, why so many states are refusing to comply with the request from the President's Commission on Voter Fraud to release voters' personal information. We'll take a look at that coming up. Plus, well, in the Democratic Party, they've taken kind of a shellacking recently, losing several special elections. So what is next for the Democrats to get them back on their feet? Well, our next guest, a lifelong Democrat, has some advice for the party in the era of President Donald Trump.
Nick Bolton.
Secretaries of State from across the country gathering in Indianapolis for a conference, as many of them are refusing a request for voter information from the White House Voter Fraud Commission. Even the commission's vice chair's home state of Kansas telling the commission no. Brian Yennis is live in our New York City newsroom with more on this. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Arthel. Well, look, remember, secretaries of states are responsible for overseeing their state's elections, and this weekend's conference of 37 Secretary of States is happening amid a White House commission's ongoing investigation into whether or not there was widespread voter fraud in the presidential election. Remember, President Trump continues to claim that anywhere from 3 million to 5 million undocumented immigrants across the country voted illegally, costing him the popular vote in the presidential election. But no proof of widespread voter fraud has ever been given. Now, last week, President Trump's Election Integrity Commission requested voter data information from all 50 states as part of its investigation. Info including the date of birth, the partial Social Security numbers, addresses, voting histories, military service, and other information. The White House says the information will be used to look for potential voter irregularities and advise states on how to improve their voting practices. But according to account by the Associated Press, 16 states in the District of Columbia have outright denied the White House's request, some citing privacy laws. 30 states say they'll give some data but not all, and 4 states remain undecided. Maine's Secretary of State says that he vows to protect the voter information in his state and denies there was national widespread voter fraud.
I would say personally that I would be stunned to see a number anywhere near that close. But I think I've also said right along the line that, sunshine is the best disinfectant. We take a look at it. We don't find anything that answers the question.
Others, like Indiana's Secretary of State, are providing some voter data.
Everyone's goal here would be to increase the confidence of the American people in the security and integrity of our elections.
Now, as you mentioned, Arthel, one Secretary of State who is not at the conference this weekend is Chris Kobach of Kansas. He is leading the President's Voter Integrity Commission. Arthel?
Brian Yennis. Thanks, Brian. Eric?
Well, Arthel, some say the Democratic Party, appears to be losing some steam after it lost 4 of those recent special elections for Congress. Well, now some are calling for House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi to be replaced. Others saying the party leadership, they've got to try to help redefine its mission. There's New York Senator Chuck Schumer, of course, who's the minority leader. Well, my next guest knows Mr. Schumer and the president very well. He co-wrote an editorial in the New York Times, along with Hillary Clinton advisor and pollster Mark Penn, who served for her a long time, calling for the party to get back to the center. Will it? Andrew Stein joins us. He's a longtime Democratic public official, former president of the Borough of Manhattan and the New York City Council, state legislator, and was chair, we should point out, of the Democrats for Trump. You went with Mr. Trump this time. Look, you had Hubert Humphrey living at your house when you were a kid. You've met JFK 3 times in your life. Yeah. You've done all the great Democratic power brokers, but you say that the party, is going too far left and out of the mainstream of America?
Well, Eric, in the early 1970s, the Democrats started the leftward shift, and they lost the House in a big way, or as the president would say, big time, and Newt Gingrich came in. And then Bill Clinton brought the party back to the center, 100,000 new cops, welfare reform, balanced budgets, and that's now the Democratic Party has tilted so far to the left again. They lost 1,000 legislative seats under Obama, 2/3 of the governorships, and both houses of Congress. So I think that as long as the Democrats continue that far left move, politically correctness, sort of socialistic under Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, they're going to continue to lose in 18 and 20.
But President Obama was elected. I mean, he wasn't to some as far left as they had thought. But look, you do have a point. I mean, like you got Bill Clinton, JFK, Scoop Jackson, the former senator from Washington, D.C. Those were kind of middle-of-the-road, mainstream Democrats, conservative somewhat. So what happened? I mean, the Blue Dogs, there are hardly any more Blue Dogs left.
Well, I think that that the Democratic Party, to be acceptable today, you have to be far to the left. And, Bill Clinton was a great president. JFK today, Eric, would be considered a conservative by Democratic standards today. He was for a strong defense, for tax cuts.
He cut taxes.
He cut taxes. He ran against Nixon as, the missile gap. So you don't have the JFKs or the Bill Clintons in today's party. And while Obama was a charismatic figure himself, the Democrats got shellacked in every other way.
Do you think JFK could get the nomination today?
Oh, no, he's too far. With all his charm, I don't think so, because he would be too much of a centrist. But Donald Trump, I think, is going to be reelected in 2020 because he is cutting regulations, stimulating the economy. He is taking us, again, showing leadership on the world stage.
What about all the problems in the Russian investigations and his tweets and other controversies and everything else?
The president's a character. I've known him since '73, but I think he's doing a really good job. He's creating jobs. I know so many people who are starting businesses now because they don't have to deal with so many regulations.
So how does the Democrat
He's making us energy independent.
How does the Democrat take him on? I mean, let me read a quote that you wrote with Mark Penn, who had worked for Hillary Clinton for years.
And Bill Clinton.
And Bill Clinton, you're right. You wrote this. Only a little more than a quarter of Americans consider themselves liberals, or almost 3 in 4 are self-identified moderates or conservatives. Yet moderate viewpoints are being given short shrift in the presidential nominating process. Americans are looking for can-do Democrats, as we said, in the mode of John F. Kennedy and Bill Clinton, leaders who rose above partisanship to unify the country, who defended human rights and equality passionately, and who also encouraged economic growth and rising wages. You don't see that out there with Senator Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Or Kamala Harris is being mentioned as a great new star.
But they're all so far to the left. They are all in this identity politics, misogyny, all these misogyny, all these other labels. The socialism doesn't work. Look at Venezuela, look at the Cuban economy. It just doesn't work. And these people are basically socialists.
So who's out there? I mean, there's one name is being mentioned is Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. I mean, there have been reports. Politico had a big story about him. He may be trying to consider potentially running. His father, of course, is Mario Cuomo. He seems to be a working class guy. He likes to fix muscle cars. Dealing with these type of issues. Do the Democrats have anyone who fit the mold of the type of candidate that you said can be successful?
Well, I'm going to be supporting Donald Trump, but I think that the best candidate for the Democrats would be Andrew Cuomo for the reasons you just stated. He has a working class background. He's very smart, and he's a centrist, and I think he'd be a strong candidate.
And he has served in the federal government. He was HUD secretary under the Clinton administration,
Bill Clinton,
and has had 2 terms so far as governor. All right, so we'll see. Your money in anybody?
Well, I would think the Democrats, if they were smart, would nominate Andrew Cuomo. I think he'd be the best candidate as a centrist and an experienced governor. But I will have to support Donald Trump. I believe in him.
Okay. July 8th, 2017, Andrew Stein right here predicts Andrew Cuomo. We're playing back this tape. We'll see what happens. Andy Stein, always good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Served for 3 decades as a Democrat. Had Kefauver sleep over in your house when you were...
Yeah, when I was a kid, Estes Kefauver and Hubert Humphrey stayed over in our house.
Right.
My father was a pallbearer at RFK's funeral. I idolized JFK and RFK.
All right, that's a legacy of the Democratic Party. Wow, thank you. Well, there's a he said, she said between the U.S. and Russia, as you know, or that the president accepted Vladimir Putin's denial of interference in our election. We'll have the debate over that straight ahead.
Our position is known. There are no grounds for saying Russia interfered in the U.S. election.
Russian President Vladimir Putin once again denying accusations that Moscow interfered in our election and setting the stage for a new dispute with the U.S. According to Putin, President Trump accepted his denial of Russian meddling during their meeting yesterday in Hamburg. But Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is pushing back, saying that the president did not take Putin at his word. Now, a debate over who said what is breaking out between Mr. Tillerson and his Russian counterpart.
President Trump said that he had heard President Putin's clear statements that this isn't true, and Russia didn't interfere in these elections, and that he accepts these statements.
They had a very robust and lengthy exchange on the subject. The president pressed President Putin on more than one occasion regarding Russian involvement. President Putin denied such involvement, as I think he has in the past.
Betsy Woodruff is here now. Betsy is the political reporter for the Daily Beast. Hey, Betsy, I want to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start about some news we got about an hour ago. National Security Advisor McMaster announced that at noon local time tomorrow, a de-escalation zone in southwest Syria will begin to take effect. So I ask you, is this considered a big geopolitical feather in President Trump's cap?
It depends on whether or not the hostilities in southwest Syria actually de-escalate as a result of this deal. This isn't the first time that American and Russian officials have made agreements about ceasefires or de-escalation efforts in Syria. But in the past, Putin hasn't gone as far as Americans would like to see him go to actually pressure Assad to abide by the terms of those ceasefires. So they've fallen apart, notably twice in Aleppo. Then Secretary of State John Kerry tried to hammer out an effective ceasefire, and it didn't work. So the fact that this ceasefire agreement has been made means that we now actually are going to get some pretty interesting information about whether or not Putin has changed his behavior, perhaps based on how the new administration relates to him. Does Putin take more steps to try to change the way that Assad behaves? And we'll find out pretty soon.
Okay, and in terms of accomplishments, in what other areas or issues can President Trump put check marks?
In terms of foreign policy, a big question for Trump is how he handles pressure from Chinese President Xi regarding the United States military defense system that we have set up in South Korea. President Xi has said, and Chinese state media has reported, that Putin wants the United States to remove missiles that we have in South Korea to try to ward off North Korean aggressive efforts. That said, of course, President Trump is unlikely to move back those missiles or reduce the America's footprint on the Korean Peninsula just because of pressure from Xi and potentially, reportedly, Putin. So one question is, does North Korea roll back some of its aggressive stances, or how does that relationship play out now that Trump's the president?
And again, that's something we have to just keep an eye on. Let's get back to Putin, though, publicly disputing Secretary Tillerson's statement, thus the president's account of what was discussed in their highly anticipated meeting. You know, given some of Mr. Trump's own mixed messaging, does the president of the United States run the risk of some believing Vladimir Putin over him?
That's certainly possible. And a larger issue here is morale in the intelligence community. An intelligence official who I recently spoke with said that every time the president suggests that he doesn't believe the consensus agreement of the United States intelligence community about what Russia did vis-a-vis our election and its misinformation efforts during 2016, that really damages the way that the White House relates to the intel community. It makes folks in the intel community feel like their work doesn't necessarily matter to the president. That said, a really big takeaway here is what Trump does, not just what he says in terms of this issue of Russian meddling in United States elections. Of course, actions speak louder than words. So one big question is, regardless of what Trump says publicly, does the Trump administration take steps to continue punishing Russia, potentially by signing off on a new round of sanctions? Or instead, does Trump give Russia some of what it wants, including potentially 2 diplomatic compounds that the previous administration kicked Russia out of? That's a big, important question.
Big, important question. And as you know, Mr. Trump has referred to himself as the modern-day president, taking on a fresh approach, discarding some of the older, stale ways of doing business as president. You know, when you're meeting with President Putin, who plans all of his moves down to every detail, how is President Trump's less structured way of operating viewed by other world leaders, Betsy?
Other world leaders are obviously pretty skeptical of the way that Trump is headed into this meeting. The fact that Ivanka Trump sat in Trump's seat for a little bit during part of the G20 conversations is something that raised eyebrows both in American diplomatic circles and around the world. At this point, though, the big question is, do the results change? Does the situation in Syria become more stable? Does North Korea roll back its belligerence? Does the United States have a more prosperous trade relationships with countries in Europe and Southeast Asia? Those are the questions I think that ultimately will determine the way that the global international community views the Trump legacy. And at this point, it's probably too early to make any conclusions about whether or not his new and extremely unorthodox style is a good thing or a bad thing.
And we have to leave it there. Betsy Woodruff, good to talk to you.
Sure thing.
Eric?
Well, I thought there's a new report out from the CDC. And it's got some encouraging news about the numbers in the opioid crisis our country is facing. Coming up, what one state is doing to combat this horrendous problem, and it begins at the pharmacy.
For the best price. Just...
Oh, there's a new report out from the Centers for Disease Control about the opioid crisis that's been sweeping the country. Researchers finding that the number of patients being prescribed painkillers is gradually decreasing. That's, of course, good news. But one state is already working on a new way to fight back. Jonathan Surrey has the story.
The amount of opioids being prescribed to Americans appears to be going down. A Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report finds while the highly addictive drugs were widely distributed in the beginning of this century, the numbers of prescriptions issued are leveling off.
We're starting to see a bit of improvement in prescribing of opioid medications, but we still have far too many getting too much.
The CDC looked at the changes in opioid prescriptions on the national and county level between 2006 and 2015, finding the amount of drugs being prescribed peaking in 2010. However, in 2015, there were still 3 times as many prescriptions being written for these medications as there were in 1999.
The level of prescribing in 2015 was enough for every American to be on opioid medications round the clock for 3 weeks.
Location appears to influence the number of prescriptions issued, and the CDC is praising states that have taken the initiative to better monitor the distribution of the drugs. Georgia now requires pharmacists to report opioid prescriptions they fill to a monitoring database within 24 hours.
The Georgia pharmacists, I think the consensus overwhelmingly was, the scope and the depth of the opioid epidemic really compels this, and so it's absolutely worth it, and we believe that it will save lives.
The report, which appears in the CDC's Vital Signs publication, recommends physicians weigh the benefits and risks of these medications when prescribing them outside of end-of-life care. In Atlanta, Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
Sears Holdings announcing more store closings. The struggling department store chain says it will shut down 8 Sears and 35 Kmart stores by early October. Hundreds of store closings have already been announced this year. The company says it's on track to cut more than $1 billion in annual costs. Shares of Sears Holdings are down about 44% from a year ago.
We all grew up with the Sears catalog.
Yeah, we
remember
did.
that? Well, speaking of growing up, former Beatles drummer Ringo Starr, well, he's keeping his annual birthday tradition, and this year he's announced an exciting reunion with one of his former Beatles. Well, the details next.